What's going on, internet? So for my first video, I figured I'd walk you guys through my flow. This is going to be mostly my front-end workflow. I'm going to show you guys how I laid out and made the UI for a new project I'm working on. It's called this URL shortener totally and completely.rocks. So the first thing I did was I made a new GitHub repo and I checked that out to my local Linux VM. And then I went ahead and created a new Jekyll project. Jekyll's normally used for making blogs, but I find that it's pretty easy to make any kind of static site with Jekyll. It also comes with some nice grunt tools, so that's why I'm using that. I had a basic idea of what I wanted the UI to look like for this project. I wanted a relatively prominent header of just text, and then I wanted a large input box to enter the URL you want to shorten, and I wanted a pretty cool action button to click. And I was playing around with the idea of doing some kind of 3D transform, and I'll get into that later. You'll see what I did with that. So the first thing I did was I went over to Google Fonts, and I started looking around for kind of a display font that I wanted to use. I really like the lobster font, so I went with that, and then I found a nice sans serif that matches that. So I chose those two and pulled the import tag into my main less file. And then I started laying out some really basic HTML elements. I set up my header, I set up a main section with an input and a button, and then I went from there. My next step was to start mocking up the button I wanted to use. So I went over to JS Fiddle and I made a span, which would be kind of a placeholder for the button, and I used some online CSS generators like gradient generators and text shadow generators and drop shadow generators to kind of draft up what I wanted the button to look like. I was playing with the idea of doing kind of a faux 3D effect with like a vertical box shadow, but I ended up cutting all that out. But that's what you see in this time lapse. So as for the 3D effect, I wanted to have an effect where the main UI would be on the front face of kind of a 3D rectangular prism. And when you click that shorten button, I wanted it to flip the entire prism around and show you the result of the URL shorten on the back, either the result or some kind of error. So what I did was I found a tutorial on how to do a 3D prism online. It's pretty simple. I copied that and I went ahead and kind of refactored it into a reusable mixin, which I use in this project. Basically, you can pass in the width, depth, and height, and also a padding value for that 3D object. And what I'm doing is I'm putting the main input and that button on the front side of the prism, and then when it flips around, I show either the success message with like a do it again button, or an error indicating what went wrong. The next thing that I did was I worked on the header section, and what I've been doing lately that I kind of like a lot is I've been manually creating an SVG tag with a couple of text elements in it, and then I style those text elements with CSS, so I set their font face and their size, and I position them with the SVG X and Y attributes. And I make sure that I don't set explicit width and heights on that SVG element. I just set a view box. And then I can set the X and Y and width and height of the text to fully fill that SVG canvas. But because I'm not setting an explicit width and height, that's a totally responsive element. I can have it fill up the entire containing element and maintain its aspect ratio, which is awesome. So that's what I'm doing in this project. And you can see that in action if you resize your browser or check out the site on a mobile device. There are a few things I left out of this video. I didn't make this website responsive in this time lapse, but the final result is responsive. I also made some tweaks to the header. I didn't like the fixed top and bottom margin on it, so I went ahead and made the header take up approximately 50% of the space, vertical space. So the rotating rectangular prism will always be vertically centered, and the header will fill up the remaining space on top. I felt like that looked pretty nice, so I went with that. that's about it for the front end layout. As for my next video, I'm planning on wiring this UI up to Firebase and creating a cool little URL shortener using the Firebase service. Probably AngularJS in Firebase, so it'll be an AngularFire app. That'll be my first AngularFire app. I've never used Firebase before and I'm pretty pumped about it. So if you want to check that out, be sure to follow my blog at 1pxsolidtomato.com and follow me here. Thanks guys, see ya.